Okay guys, Aishi here. I'm still in the process of converting all of my builds over to video format. You can find the imager link for the build that's originally here in the description. And this is going to be for my Primalist build. That's going to be a melee Entangling Roots Primalist. So what I'm going to do is just go over my passive tree, my skill tree, stat priority, equipment priority, and then after that I'll show you the build in action around some wave 400 stuff. Okay, we'll be going a bit line by line. You can see, I'll hide this now so you can see my entire screen. Okay, and you can see my stats page on the left side. It's obviously a attunement focused build because our main skill is attunement. It scales both the damage on swipe and entangling roots. Okay, so we'll take a look at the Primalist Tree first. And the important thing to notice is know that our entangling roots, I think it's probably best that we go over this first, is that the majority of our damage comes from entangling roots. And it is spec'd into the notable that instead of doing the damage over time, it gets turned into a melee cast skill. So what this does is that it'll convert all of your damage into a melee tag, and you can scale it with your weapon itself. So it's kind of that interesting thing where it plays like a spell, but it also scales off your weapon and scales off your critical damage, your melee percent damage. So keep that in mind. That's why we're picking a lot of these melee passives. So in general, anything with attunement on the tree, you're going to want to max out. For the most part, we're going to be taking some flat fizz. The minion increased damage doesn't matter too much. And we're going to get 1 point into primal strength so we can get survival of the pack for our melee leech. Now again, melee leech inside this game, leech rates are incredibly strong. If you hit even one minion with like one spell, you're going to be leeching to full. It's like everything's on insane leech rates. So having a little bit of leech always helps. Okay, and all the points up here actually deal more with minion related things, and we're not a minion build. So we're going to stick towards the bottom part of the Primalist tree and pick up our pick up our stat points, flat health, and melee damage. We take early points into Beastmaster because we want to unlock Claw Guard, which is probably one of the most useful passives for any melee build on Primalist. You're going to be taking 15% less damage whenever you attack with a melee attack. And reminder that Entangling Roots does have a melee attack now, so if you hit with the initial hit portion of it, you're going to be taking less damage. 5 points into Savagery. It's very well valued at 7% melee damage per point, and we just need the 5 points to unlock Claw Guard. Over to Shaman, we're going to see that it's going to be 8 points into attunement and mana because we do have a decent focus on mana for this build. Because the cast cost for Entangling Roots gets pretty high. If you spec purely into damage and you don't take any mana efficiency points, you're going to see about 80 costs per cast, and that's way too high. So try to shoot for optimally about at least 3, optimally 4 casts per mana bar, so you can probably get a 5th off while your mana regins. And we can take the points inside Beastmaster and Shaman later. You don't really need to rush for it. Unless you play hardcore, you can always get Claw Guard here first, because the less damage taken is pretty nice. The main points inside Druid, we're going to be speccing into Blood Claws, which is a little bit of bleed, which doesn't really matter for our build. It's decent scaling because we have a little bit more fizz, but we're mainly looking for that physical damage leech, just for safety. Because if you look previously here, this is 6% melee leech. The issue is that we're not always attacking, so we're not always leeching. So we'd rather have a few points into Thornburst, and we'd rather have a few points into Blood Claws, so we can leech off of our peripheral skills. We have instant cast on Thornburst, which gives a ranged AoE for projectiles, and we have a Thicket Blade skill, which is a physical damage AoE inside us that's constantly hitting. So with these two skills that are on instant cast, we can leech off of our physical damage, and it gives us a nice safety net when we're playing. We take points into flat health here, and we take points into mana efficiency and attunement. Mana efficiency being one of the core things that makes our build more playable, just because we have to sustain this insane mana cost somehow. We take points into Veil Warrior because the physical damage there, it's at only 5% per point, but it's better than nothing down here. And then we take some flat melee 2 spells and physical on Spirit Claws. I took 1 point of Tremor because it might as well have been a misclick. I wanted to see what it was doing. You can always move this point over to Veil Warrior, no problem. We skip the middle portion of this tree because it's mostly damage over time, minion related skills, and some protections that don't really matter too much. And there's some damage over time here, and there's some vitality, which, while nice, you don't really want to take solely vitality as a standalone node. One of the major things about the Druid tree, why I decided to go Druid instead of Beastmaster for this insane 100% dodge rating and 8% flat dodge per point for basically capping out your dodge at like 65 to 70%, is because of this node here for Ferocity. Now if you take a look at my weapon here, it is a tier 5 base crit weapon. It is 12% implicit critical chance, which is base, and then another 13% on tier 5 added crit damage. Added crit chance. So it's 25% base crit. We have 5% base crit as well on our character sheet. So our melee crit chance is somewhere around the neighborhood of 80%. And this doesn't include the crit chance on the tree itself, which is on the skill tree itself. So if you get about 8 to 10 points inside Ferocity, you're going to be capping your crit damage without any other investment inside your gear. So Ferocity essentially ends up being like nearly a 3 times damage multiplier. You definitely want to get this. And if there's extra crit chance anywhere else, you're free to lower the number of points inside it, or you're free to max it out. It basically drives the damage of your build. There's a couple leftover points inside Hideskin. Flat health is never bad to go. And then I took points into Forest Fervor because we have 100% crit, more or less. We're always going to be having this 75% physical damage crit. Just remember that if you walk up and cast on a pack of enemies, you're not going to be getting this bonus. But if you leap slam into them, if you prime your damage with swipe, you're good to go. And I think one of the strongest nodes inside the entire tree, between Beastmaster, Shaman, and Druid, is 100 flat health and 20 attunement for a total of 20 points on Eternal Nature. So that should do it for the tree. There's some other things that you can probably spec into. If you want to get more flat health, no one's going to stop you. It's a perfectly fine choice. You should be maxing out Ferocity unless you have a little bit of crit on your amulet or your ring. You should be maxing it out. And you probably don't want Tremor. I should have unspec'd that. Okay, moving on to skills. So for Thorn Burst, we have it as a more peripheral damage, right? We don't really want it to be doing the bulk of our damage. We mostly want it to have a source of ranged leech. So what I do here is I take points into Thorn Burst, a retaliatory Thorn Burst, where you have about 40% chance to cast it when you are hit. So even if you aren't pressing this, even if you aren't using the 5 cost here, you're going to be getting some returns on just getting hit. I took some range on this so I can reach range mobs a bit easier, and I took some additional thorns so that can fill in the gaps between my AoEs. You can always move this over to piercing, there's absolutely no issue, or you can move this anywhere else. It's more of like a leftover point. And I did take some points into instant cast, so I can cast it multiple times while I'm playing, and then I can take 40% inside Bulb Shield. The 40% of repeating a cast, the repeated cast can also cast again, so it's close to a 2 times damage multiplier, but in our case we mostly want it to be repetitive, so we don't need to really worry about recasting it too much. For Tornado here, it was something I was testing with. You don't really need to worry about it. We only use the skills on the hotbar and below. This can be a free point. You're free to spec into wolves or something if you're feeling lonely and you want a companion. When we get a Frenzy Totem tree, you can always spec into that. You can hang around inside Werebear form. Whatever. But our next skill would be Fury Leap. That would be our main movement skill. I spec this into Pull on landing so that we can group up mobs, and because of the fact that our mana costs so much, we do want to conserve mana a bit more. So we do pull enemies together so we can get bigger casts and save our mana. This is a full utility spec, so we have a 20% chance to reset Fury Leap when you kill enemies with another skill, and you can see that in play later. You can jump on a pack of enemies, pull them together, AoE them, and after that we can hop out, hop away, or go to another pack, or jump on the same enemy. And we have 105% increased damage when you jump, as well as some increased attack speed and cast speed. So it's most utility. It's going to buff you, pull enemies, and it'll reset on kill. Here is our backup skill, essentially. We're going to be using this. You want to rush for Avatar of the Wild right away, which allows this skill to start scaling with attunement, which is our main stat. Otherwise, it only scales with strength. Only 1 point each to reach the attunement node. And then here it's similar to Fury Leap, it's a more utility spec. You're going to see stacking global damage with Battle Howl. It goes up to 8 times. Some attack speed, more attack speed and cast speed, and we have some crit chance and crit multiplier here to make sure it at least packs a punch. We don't really need too many points inside the crit chance because we have tons from our tree already, and 100% crit multiplier ensures that this actually it doesn't feel bad when you run out of mana. You're using swipe, you're dealing a decent amount of damage per hit, and more importantly, you're going to be stacking your damage increase so that when you get your big cast off, it matters even more. So it doesn't really have a lull inside your gameplay. And finally, our main damaging skill, Entangling Roots. Again, we take the initial hit skill so that we have an increase in mana cost, but it gets the melee tag and we can use it as more of a melee skill. We max out the melee increased damage, and then we get the always stuns node. And then instead of one big cast and it hits once, we spec into Roots of Lap, which increases the mana cost. Again, always increasing mana cost. This skill costs a ton of mana. But it creates 3 patches. So instead of one big AoE on you, it creates 3 smaller AoEs. And you can kind of see it here, where there's when they disappear, you sort of see the green circle. And what that does is that just shows you where the AoE lands. Now the important thing about this is that instead of one hit, these patches can overlap, and the AoE actually overlaps and does a ton of damage. And we have one more additional patch. So we essentially throw damage. We essentially throw spell damage scaling out the window. We throw the duration of the CC and the duration of the damage over time out the window, and we use this purely as an initial hit. Thanks for the follow. Okay, so we have finally our points into Fleeting Grove, which gives us 90% increased mana efficiency. So without this node, this would essentially be somewhere around like close to 90 mana. It's actually pretty insane. And again, we reduce the duration, so our CC goes down and our damage goes up. The 2 points into this Healing Nova, it's somewhat useless right now, but we're, again, only using it to reach the Fleeting Grove. Finally, 4 points into Imbued Sap, which gives us 100% increased damage on cast. So our sequential cast will always do insane amounts more damage, and a final point into Internal Imbuement for the buff, just because. Okay, let's take a look. We'll go over the gear, and then we'll show you some Wave 400 gameplay. Again, always try to cap your glancing. The dodge is... And the issue is that you don't really have as many defenses as a Sentinel. You don't have any minions to rely on as meat shields. You're mostly relying on your mobility from your Fury Leap. The fact that your Entangling Roots always stuns, so you can interrupt a lot of casts. And it does, you basically one-shot waves, so that's something else too, right? So you do want to spend some points into dodge. My mana, which is the majority of my sort of damage enabling stat, comes from my rings, my relic, and it should come from my amulet, but crafting wasn't on my side. So the main point of so our prefixes are mainly going to be glancing and attunement. So you're going to be seeing glancing and attunement on the majority of these items. At least for our gloves, boots, and helm. I made the choice to do double glancing on our chest as well instead of on our belt, because I want to put the dodge rating on the belt. So again, it's the usual sort of assortment of stats. It's going to be dodge, health, glancing, and attunement. Now, one of the more interesting things is that our relic is a bit more of a DPS relic. It gets crit multiplier and physical damage. Again, the physical damage scales all of our skills. The physical damage scales the Entangling Roots, it scales the Thicket Blades, it scales the Thorn Burst, it scales the Swipe, it scales the Fury Leap. So if you do want a bit more DPS focused build, you can always get more physical increased damage on your amulet as well. But there's not many damage stats that you can get on your rings, maybe critical percent, but that's really it. You do want your glancing on your rings instead. The issue is that I have been too lucky with the crafting, so I decided to borrow these rings from my Voidcaster, honestly. Optimally, I would be removing the void damage on these rings, putting in glancing for health, and then removing one of these glancing rolls on my chest for attunement instead. Weapons specifically, the prefixes are essentially best in slot. You're going to be wanting base crit so you can scale the percentage crit off your tree, and flat melee damage, because instead of increased melee damage, so you can scale up your Thorn Burst, Thicket Blades, your Thorn Burst and your Thicket Blades. The flat damage, the damage effectiveness on Entangling Roots on the melee portion is 150% effectiveness, so the flat damage does beat out the increased physical damage for your weapon. And the suffixes are a bit preference, right? I always prefer chill on hit for my suffix, and the stun chance is just because I had it on another character. There's a lot of borrowed gear on here. Oh, one important thing is that you do want a jeweled circlet base for your helmet, just because of the mana increase. The mana rolls from, I think, somewhere between 10 and 35. Definitely look for something above 30. So that does it for gear. Let's get into some gameplay. You're basically going to be seeing me popping buffs, leaping to mob together enemies, one-shotting things with the insane damage that Entangling Roots does, and on my downtime when I have 1 or 2 mobs, I'm going to be swiping. Again, the issue with this build, among many others, is that you're mostly restricted to melee range. So you do want to play towards the bottom end of the map, just because you can sort of see the enemies that are coming in. And you can always kite around the rocks as well. And again, if I'm going to show you here, remember that Fury Leap does reset. So you can jump in, kill the packs, move somewhere else, and you do have a burst of movement speed. So that's really useful for kiting around those more dangerous mobs like the Fireballers. Let me think. Void Mauls, whenever they do reintroduce them someday. So here I am stacking up damage with my swipe. I get more damage on Leap Slam. And you're going to be seeing nearly 20k on these Entangling Roots. And remember that your Entangling Roots has a potential at 4 times. So that's nearly 80k damage per cast if you do land all of your AoEs. So the single target damage is pretty impressive too. And again, your swipe, even though it's your 0 mana cost ability, there's no shame in using swipe either. It does a pretty impressive amount of damage. It stacks the buffs on itself, and you're constantly attacking, you're constantly leeching. You're pretty hard to kill while you're hitting enemies. So let's get a couple more waves in. Then maybe we can leave. We can go do some monoliths just to show you how it plays inside the mapping portion. So the idea behind playing this build in higher waves is to make sure you know which enemies are the dangerous ones and which ones that you should instantly burst down. If you see those packs of Fireballers coming at you, you're going to be wanting to bursting those down ASAP. While you're kiting, you could always build up your damage. And remember that you always stun on your Entangling Roots. That's a very scary set of mobs between the spiteful, between the Void, the Elite Void Worm and the Bear. And one more thing on the swipe that I remembered I did not mention is that it does have 14% culling. So it's pretty good for finishing off mobs too. Alright, Bear down at 400 waves. Not too bad. Again, remember, you always do stun. It's too important to stress that. The golem that's casting there, you could always interrupt his cast with the 100% stun. What else can you do? Those whirlpool dogs that just spawned, they're a bit of a problem enemy. You can always save your mana to burst them. Like there, I would prioritize the dogs here just to kill them off. And you can always AoE in 2 different spots because of your reset on the leap. Just remember that the reset on your leap slam is only every 5 seconds. So if you do misplay, you're expecting your leap to get you out of a situation, but you killed enemies and it was before the reset timer, you're in trouble. Whenever you're in a bit of a sticky situation, do remember that your Thicket Blades is a constant source of leech. You're very hard to kill while you're leeching. So if you do want to pop a Thicket Blades, just for the constant source of leech, no problem there. But this is going to be the general gameplay. You're going to be stacking up your swipe stacks, jumping into a giant bunch of mobs, and flexing on them. And your waves are cleaned up just like that. Alright, let's do one more set of waves and we'll head into the monolith. Huh, okay. Fireballers. Gotta take care of those guys ASAP. Void Thralls, you can probably out-tank them. You can also one-shot them, so there's that. So things I'm looking forward to with this build, your Thicket Blades. The skill on my W doesn't have a tree yet, so that's something I'm looking forward to. If Thicket Blades is strong enough, I may be making the switch over to a % Fizz weapon instead and seeing if I can scale the Fizz on Thicket Blades. A bit unlikely, but the option's always open. And don't be afraid to kite around while your mana is recovering. Just remember to make sure that you do have you have your leap slam on demand for when you need to gap close and do a little leeching. And that this little hiding spot behind the rock is really useful. So you do the most damage possible. After you've stacked up your swipe, you're probably not getting the whole 8 stacks on it, but you're getting somewhere close. You are going to be leap slamming for the 105% increased damage. You'll have a cast of Entangling Roots already for the, I believe it was extra 100 damage, 100%. So you're going to have somewhere in the neighborhood of about 300% damage already. And you add that all together, you're probably going to see about 30k hits on your Entangling Roots. You couple that with the fact that you do 4 AoEs, the potential for it to overlap, you're probably going to be seeing over 100k damage per cast under optimal conditions. Alright, let's head over to some Monolith and see how the build performs. It's not going to be the same as Arena because you probably will be lacking more mana. Just because the mobs are nice and densely packed inside Arena. But you do have a decent amount of mobility. Your mobility skill resets, which is... Okay, it resets and it goes through walls, which is a little more than what you can say of Sentinel. Sentinel does have 2 stacks of it if you spec into the 2 lunges, but the issue is that it doesn't go through walls, so it's going to be a little slower than you in certain areas. And then on the other hand, you have a cooldown, so you're not going to be able to teleport freely through like Mage. But you don't have too much of a delay, so that's always nice. Okay. On the bright side, with your insane damage, you basically don't have to worry about any health mods on the enemies. Dodge is that's one of the more interesting things too, because your damage is split up into 4 AoEs. You do a lot better versus dodge enemies compared to other builds. That's a stability. And even if one of your patches hit, you'll get the stun off. So I'd say in terms of the consistency of the damage, it's pretty amazing. And Leap Slam does throw you through the floor sometimes, but what can you do? Again, damage, pretty ridiculous. I'd say it's almost overkill damage. If you have the chance, you probably want to switch over to more move speed on your silver rings or something. You can even run like arboreal circuits and just run through the map that way. Alright, we'll do maybe 3 timelines, and I think you'll get the idea of how the build performs. So again, in short, stomps arenas, does too much damage. You do need to invest into defenses, unfortunately. Fortunately, your weapon is very not demanding. You see those dot builds where you need multiple tier 5s on your weapon, right? Damage over time. Chance to ignite, chance to poison. And maybe some attack speed. Maybe some fire percent. Maybe poison percent. But no, this is a good old melee build, and all you really do need is 2 tier 5s in your weapon. You need flat fizz and your crit on a decent polearm base, and you're good to go. Everything else can go towards your attunement, and the rest can go towards your percent health, your flat health, and your dodge. And again, I think I might recommend the same set of stats inside your for Werebear whenever the tree comes out. I know a lot of people are a bit excited for the tree for Werebear, and I think this is pretty much going to be the same spec. So you see I'm not really casting Thornburst and Thicket Blade just because there's no reason to. The build already does enough damage and you can sort of burst down anything you need. So if you want to expand on any attunement based skills, I'd say you spec into this build and then you move into another one later. I think one of the interesting things that I want to see with Werebear is some of that charge cooldown reduction, just because of the fact that it feels kind of weird having a gap closer with cooldown, even if it's as strong as is. It's interesting how they tied the buff together with the cooldown reduction. I'm sorry, it's interesting how they tie the buff together with the movement skill. So it kind of makes it, this build's not too zoomy. But there's a gap closer on Bear. That's pretty interesting. Again, this is just showing that it's mainly a stat stacking build with some mana efficiency on it. So you do have a lot of flexibility with how you want to build the build later. And again, for bosses, stack up your swipe, leap, press E, collect your loot, or whatever your Entangling Roots build is. Button. Okay, so again, I'll wrap up the tree a little bit, these skills, I'll wrap up the stats, and I think that should be good to go. On your passive tree, you're looking for melee damage, attunement, flat health, and mana. Ferocity is your main passive skill because it'll drive the damage on your crit. On your tree for Thornburst, I personally spec'd it into counter Thorn's attacks. So you pretty much leave the skill on your bar, and you get some leech back on the fizz. Again, the reason why we take Blood Claws is because it's physical leech. Everything else on the tree, like Survival of the Pack, is melee leech. We get Blood Claws because this 15% physical leech lets us leech continuously off of Thornburst, which is a little bit ranged, and Thicket Blades, which is a personal AoE. If you're always leeching, it's really hard to die because of how high the leech rate is in this game. You basically have a free slot on this skill, on your 5th skill, because we don't have anything to use currently. Leap Slam is full utility with pull, chance to reset, increased damage, and attack speed. Swipe scales off attunement once you take Avatar of the Wild, and it's used as your main DPS skill for when you have no mana, and it also increases your damage over time so that you can get higher cast off when you do have mana. Entangling Roots is spec'd into your melee damage notable, so it scales off melee damage, scales off melee crit, always stuns, 4 AoEs, and increased mana efficiency, as well as an insane 100% increased damage buff. Your weapon is always going to be, for your prefixes, increased base crit for melee, because again, your Entangling Roots now has a melee tag from the notable. Flat damage, because the Entangling Roots notable has 100% 50 increase melee damage. And you want a mixture of always capping your glancing and health and dodge rating on your gear, as well as attunement on every slot possible. You want a jeweled circlet base and sapphire ring base on your rings and helm for mana. And dodge percent should go on either your belt, amulet, or boots. Now for your stats page, nothing else much to say. You want at least a 80% melee stat sheet crit. You want at least a little bit of melee crit strike multiplier, usually coming from your relic base, your amulet, not your weapon. And that should do it. And if you want to see the increased damage go up, again, you leap, damage goes up. You cast Entangling Roots, damage goes up. You're going to be seeing close to 300% damage when you stack up your swipe. Okay guys, and that should be it. Thanks again for watching. Again, you'll find the imager for the original build description down inside the comments, and you'll have fun. Take care. See you next time.